Megavanan and welcome my friends to Elven Awakenings, chatting with the Elven Scholar. And now, to your guide to all things Elvish, Dr. Erendil Spinderelis, the Elven Scholar.
Once upon a time, in a forest rich in pine and oak, lived a young elf. He lived amongst his neighbors who were clothed in fur and feather, and found joy and peace with each sunrise, and silence in the evening light of the stars. He spent his days communing with his woodland brothers and sisters, and the nights in contemplation and meditation. Light shone upon him unstained from the mortal world, and he was happy. But as time passed, he became more aware of the land outside, filled with fear and despair, and he knew his time of living in the gentle woods was coming to an end, and his journey as a teacher was upon him. When the morning sun found him again, he walked out of the forest with nothing but the clothes on his back, and strode into the land of man, to teach and to be taught. For it is the way of all teachers that the student so often will be the better master. This is my story, and it is true. My name is Erendil, and I am the Elven Scholar. Megovan and my Elven, Fae, and Otherkin brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of Elven Awakenings, chatting with the Elven Scholar on Heroes and Mortals Radio. Today we're going to have a little bit of fun. This is our Halloween special, and we're going to diverge from a little bit of the heavy stuff so much and talk about something a little bit more fun, the dark side of the legends and myths of elves and fairies and otherkin throughout the centuries. I'm going to cover a little bit of the history of how they came up with these dark legends and such, and we're actually going to tell a few stories, a little myths from the past that might be a little bit more fun and more apropos to Halloween. In the second half of the show, we will continue with our tradition of having the open mic, so I encourage everyone who would like to ask me any questions or express some comments about anything Elven, Fae, or Otherkin. Please feel free. That'll be in the second half of the show. You are welcome to call at 442-227-2187. That is a U.S. number, so if you're outside of the United States or Canada, you may incur extra expenses. So you're welcome to call before the lines go active at about 1:30. And you can leave a message, a voice message. I will be checking those, and I will do my best to answer all your questions or respond to your comments. So again, the number is 442-227-2187, or you can email me at radio@elvenscholar.org, radio@elvenscholar.org, and you can leave these messages on voicemail or on the email throughout the week. I do check them to see if there's anything that people would like to have responded to, and I will be happy to do it during the live show. So let's go ahead and let's get started on the dark side. Okay, a little history first. Let's talk about the genesis or birth of the whole concept of dark elves. The root of all elfdom can be traced back mostly to Norse mythology. To the Norse, elves were practically demigods, beautiful, slender, magical. They were everything that humans should strive to be. All right, Norse light elves were good and helpful, while they living in the elven world known as Afanir. But the dark elves, also known as the Dakarthar, were very different. So you're going to have to forgive me, if you would, please, on some of my pronunciation of the Scandinavian, but I'll get it as close as I can. They dwelled deep underground in a world called Svarfamir, but often they would emerge from the shadows or at night to sit on sleeping people's chests and cause nightmares. Their skin was blackened from living near underground forges. In his research on Norse mythology and the elves, Snorri wrote, and Snorri, by the way, was a writer from many, many years ago, a Christian writer who obviously colored his research from his religious beliefs. The dark elves live below the earth, he wrote, in caves in the dark forest, and they are unlike light elves in appearance and much more unlike them in reality. The light elves are brighter than the sun in appearance, but the dark elves are darker than pitch. All right. Well, the Celts seem to have some version of these creatures in their own stories. Their word Dioshi means dark elf, and their word Dushi means black elf. Unfortunately, due to their oral history, there's not a whole lot of surviving Celtic stories that tell us why this distinction existed. But Western Europe was ripe with these type of tales, and the Northern Isles also had their own version. The Orkney and Shetland Islands had stories of dark elves, often referred to as trow or drow. Okay. They lived underground and worked forges, which is interesting. They worked with forges. So you're going to notice if we get further into this that we now believe from a lot of these stories that the darker elves were really dwarves. And so they're really the same thing, and we'll kind of get into that here a little bit more. So that's kind of interesting. All right. So they were connected with dwarvish type peoples, which caused their skin to turn black. They were thought to be very, in their words, ugly and cruel. The tales from the Orkney Islands just had drow. All right, to mean was the Shetland Islands made them out just to be downright evil. In both cases, they remained underground and only ventured out at night, for the sunlight would turn them to stone, which is an interesting fact that's been associated with trolls, for example, Tolkien, in modern times. It was said this drow would hold lavish ceremonies and celebrations below the ground, often kidnapping or luring human musicians to come and perform for them. Jacob Grimm, and that is actually from the Brothers Grimm. This was actually part of the Grimm family, and it's interesting, I actually got to meet some members of the real Grimm family quite a number of years ago. That was actually with the clinic. Attempted to make sense of these varying versions of dark elves. His solution was a three-pronged approach. He decided there were light elves, dark elves, and black elves. Dark elves were in fact dwarves, but black elves were their own thing. And his description was not so much downright black, but dim and dingy. As many of you know, Tolkien was an Anglo-Saxon scholar and was heavily inspired by Nordic and Germanic mythology. So it's no surprise that elves play a crucial role in the stories of Middle-earth. But his take on dark elves is very different from what we've been just discussing. For him, dark elves were defined as those who had never seen the light of the two trees of Valinor, which was initially the only light aside from the stars that used to exist in the world, according to Tolkien. The tree's destruction brought about the creation of the sun and the moon, as per Tolkien's creation stories and myths. As far as it's written, they do not have any gray or black skin, but instead are pale with silver or black hair. It seems very likely they lived in dark places as well. Tolkien's early concepts of dark elves said, imagine them as wandering about and often ill-disposed towards the light elves, or sometimes applied to elves who were captured by Morgoth and enslaved and then released to do what mischief they could among the elves. One line specifically that we find in the Silmarillion states, they call it the Moriquindi, elves of the darkness, for they never beheld the light what was before the sun and the moon. This goes, for those that are not familiar with it, Tolkien didn't believe in connecting elves and dwarves. He felt that they were two separate creations. The dwarves were created by the Valar Aule, and they were, again, he was considered the Vala, or to humans, the god of forging and iron and gems and things of that nature, and so he wanted his own people, so he helped create the dwarves. All right, but Tolkien said that dark elves were just elves like any other elf, but they never got to see the light, and they never became, I guess the best way to put it is, they never got the experience of seeing something beyond where they were in the dark forests and such like that. And they lived in fear of Morgoth, who would have been considered like the devil or Lucifer or Satan. And so they lived, interesting, they lived in darkness and fear. Some subjects I've talked about extensively in the past, about you either live in the light or you live in the dark. So Tolkien kind of took that same approach. The light elves lived in the light, and the dark elves lived in the darkness and lived mainly, a lot of them mainly in fear. There is one very well-known dark elf in Tolkien's stories, Eowyn of Non-Elmath from the Silmarillion. He was explicitly referred to as a dark elf from many characters. He was cruel, lived deep in the forest, and stayed away from the light. We do know that the term dark elf was an insult, and it was used by the sons of Feanor against King Thingol. Again, these are stories from the Silmarillion, and if you're interested, I'd be happy to do shows talking about those stories and legends. Well, Thingol was a king, and he did indeed live underground, but that didn't make him one of the dark elves, because he was basically trying to recreate a realm that existed and where the light elves lived. All right, but otherwise they used the term dark elf as more of an insult within the Tolkien realm. All right, one more note about dark elves. Again, to most European mythology, elves were seen as both a point of fear and curiosity to the early societies. They were often known to be sociable and even friendly to humans, but they were still greatly feared because of their temper. If they perceived a human to have harmed or offended them in any way, they were quick to retaliate with punishment. Common punishments included illnesses, night terrors, and cruel tricks and attacks directed towards the victims. It is noted, however, that the elves did sometimes help out and cure sicknesses, but they were known to have a lot of tempers. Kind of takes me back to the movie with Elf, where he talks about there are angry elves and they must be from the South Pole. Okay, so enough about a little bit of the history. I could go on and on for hours and hours about the history of elves and dwarves and such, but I'd like to go ahead and actually tell some tales about these, because there are really some fascinating stories quite fit for Halloween. All right, let's get to some stories about how humans and elves have interacted with over the centuries. Okay, while there seems to have been a great many ways that elves could threaten the safety of a human being, there were some elves who lived in peace with humans and even formed relationships with them. While there are some accounts of elves who tried to seduce humans against their will into having relationships with them, it appears that there were some humans and elves who actually had children consensually. These children were known to be especially beautiful and often went on to do great things. More often than not, half-elf, half-human children appeared to humans as their features, though they were often very beautiful and were capable of great magical feats. They sometimes went on to become magicians, sorcerers, and healers. It's interesting that a lot of the great healers throughout human history are actually considered half-elven. Okay. There are several ballads and stories concerning elves who mate with humans. They usually involve some sort of riddle that the person must solve in order to become their lover. Some stories also require the character to rescue a human-turned-elf in order to win their lover's hand in marriage. This kind of goes in line with the stories that include an elfin knight. The elfin knight is a story that can be told in two manners. The first is that the knight threatens to steal a woman away to be his lover unless she can complete an impossible task. So in order to save herself from becoming his lover, she has to complete an impossible task. The second is that a woman must complete an impossible task in order to win his hand in marriage. Obviously, over time, the second has become a lot more popular. The tale usually starts with the knight blowing into a magic horn that causes desire to emerge in the heart of the maiden. She makes a wish that she could marry the knight. Suddenly, the knight appears and tells her that he will marry her if she can perform several tasks. All impossible, of course. In return, the maiden responds with several impossible tasks of her own that the knight must complete and wins the hand of the knight in marriage. A wonderful tale that actually talks about this quite a bit and has both its dark and light side, and some of you may know of this, is the tale of Tamlin. The tale of Tamlin begins with a warning that Tamlin is an elf who takes possession or the virginity of any maiden that travels to the forests of Catrahal. One day a young woman travels through the forest to Cotterhow and plucks a double rose from the ground. Tomlin appears and asks her why she has entered his forest and taken his possessions. She replies that Cotterhow belongs to her. It was a gift from her father. The young maiden goes on her way, only to discover later that she has become pregnant. Some trick. She returns to the forest and plucks another set of roses from the ground. Tomlin appears again to challenge her actions. She asks him if he had ever been a human, or if he has always been an elf. He tells the maiden that he had once been a mortal, but was captured by the Queen of the Fairies and turned into an elf. He also reveals that he is afraid that he will be sacrificed at the altar of hell this year if she does not save him. Together they devise a plan to rescue Tomlin from the Fairy Queen. They enact the plan, and the maiden wins the love of Tomlin. The Queen of Fairies acknowledges her defeat and releases Tomlin. Her impossible task in that case was to win him. And what was the task? Not all the stories tell you. What had happened was that Tomlin told her that on such and such a night the fairies would go a-riding, and he was to be amongst the company. And what would happen is as they were going by, she was to be hiding in the forest behind a bush. And when they went by on their horses in their grand hunt, she was to come out and grab him from his horse and pull him to the ground and hold on with all her might, never let go. If she could succeed in never letting him go, she would win him. Well, that night came, and she peered from behind a bush, and here came the cavalcade, all coming down through the forest, and past him was the queen, and right next to him was Tomlin. So she rushed out from behind the bush, grabbed him and pulled him to the ground and held on tight. The queen stopped and cast a spell on him, and he turned into a giant snake, trying to bite her, and she would not let go. And then turned from a snake and turned into a great wolf and tried to bite her and claw his way out, and she would not let go. And this went on for some time, changing from one animal or monster, so to speak, into another. And yet, because of her love for him, she never let him go. And in the end, the queen gave up and said, "He is yours," and it was over with. So that's the old tale of Tomlin. Then there's the story of Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight. As this goes on, not all relationships between elves and humans end well. The tale of the Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight starts the same as the Elfin Knight, with the knight blowing into a horn that causes desire to arise in the heart of Lady Isabel. She wishes with all her might that she could marry the knight, and he appears and tells her that she will be his wife if she will come to him in the greenwood. Upon arriving at the greenwood, Lady Isabel is shocked when the knight reveals that he has killed the daughters of 7 kings to steal their treasures and possessions, and intends to make her the 8th. Fortunately, Lady Isabel is quite a quick thinker and tells the knight to put his head on her knee to rest together before she is to die. She then lulls him to sleep with a charm, binds him with her own belt, and kills him. All right, so a lot of the stories are rather simplistic back then. Why he would have put his head on her knee, I don't know. But again, that shows how there is both the light and the dark side of this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you some other stories, some of that you may have heard, and we're going to kind of dwell a little bit on the dark side here. All right, I'm going to tell you what for some has been called a true story. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but this is supposedly a true story out of Europe. All right, and this is under a category I like to call Stories by the Hearth, and this is the one called The Green Children. Another wonderful thing, says Ralph of Coggeshall, happened in Suffolk at St. Mary's of the Wolf Pits. A boy and his sister were found by the inhabitants of that place near the mouth of a pit which is there, who had the form of all their limbs like to those of other men, but they differed in the color of their skin from all the people of our habitable world, for the whole surface of their skin was tinged of a green color. No one could understand their speech. When they were brought as curiosities to the house of a certain knight, Sir Richard Durkine, at Wykes, they wept bitterly. Bread and other victuals were set before them, but they would touch none of them, though they were tormented by great hunger, as the girl afterwards acknowledged. At length, when some beans just cut with their stalks were brought into the house, they made signs with great avidity that they should be given to them. When they were brought, they opened the stalks instead of the pods, thinking the beans were in the hollow of them, but not finding them there, they began to weep anew. When those who were present saw this, they opened the pods and showed them the naked beans. They fed on these with great delight, and for a long time tasted no other food. The boy, however, was always languid and depressed, and he died within a short time. The girl enjoyed continued good health, and becoming accustomed to various kinds of food, she lost completely that green color, and gradually recovered the sanguine habit of her entire body. She afterwards regenerated by the layer of holy baptism, and lived for many years in the service of that knight, as I have frequently heard from him and his family. Was rather loose and wanton in her conduct. Being frequently asked about the people of her country, she asserted that the inhabitants, and all they had in that country, were of a green color, and that they saw no sun, but enjoyed a degree of light like what is after sunset. Being asked how she came into this country with the aforesaid boy, she replied that as they were following their flocks, they came to a certain cavern, on entering which they heard a delightful sound of bells. Ravished by whose sweetness, they went for a long time wandering on through the cavern, until they came to its mouth. When they came out of it, they were struck senseless by the excessive light of the sun, and the unusual temperature of the air, and they thus lay for a long time. Being terrified by the noise of those who came on them, they wished to fly, but they could not find the entrance to the cavern before they were caught. The story is told by William of Newbridge, who places it in the reign of King Stephen. He says he long hesitated to believe it, but he was at length overcome by the weight of evidence. According to him, the place where the children appeared was about 4 or 5 miles from Bury St. Edmunds. They came in harvest time out of the wolf pits. They both lost their green hue and were baptized and learned English. The boy, who was the younger, died, but the girl married a man at Lena and lived many years. They said their country was called St. Martin's Land, as that saint was chiefly cherished and worshipped there, that the people were Christians and had churches, that the sun did not rise there, but that there was a bright country which could be seen from theirs, being divided from it by a very broad river. Interesting. True, I don't know, but it is a story that comes down from hundreds of years, and it's fun to play with. Could there be another land with green people there? All right, another story for you is The Fairies of Merlin's Crag. Again, this is a very old story. All right, so this one is supposedly going to be a story of real fairies, and supposedly it is true. A man who was working near Merlin's Crag in Scotland saw one, and then another, and then another. Not before too long, he was dancing with the fairies, and they were dragging him underground into their house beneath the moor. There are certain places where the very earth itself is charged with that fiery, unpredictable energy known as magic. One of those centers of enchantment is in Lancashire, Scotland. You have to tramp for miles and miles across a bleak, soggy moorland to reach it, but eventually you will see a mound of jagged rocks rising out of the peat bog. That will be Merlin's Crag. The folk who live thereabouts say that over 1,000 years ago, the famous wizard Merlin lived and practiced his magic among those rocks. No doubt he made use of his spells of the black peat that was all around him. You see, peat is like no other earth, for it burns and gives warmth and life to the people who seek out a living in the moorlands. I can tell you myself, I have been over there multiple times, and I too have burned peat in my house, and it is a different kind of warmth, and definitely a different kind of, an earthy kind of incense that spreads throughout your house. I absolutely love burning peat, and when we lived up in Northern California on our Elven Sanctuary, we actually would burn it, and it would take me home again. A few hundred years ago, a poor but honest man worked on a farm near Merlin's Crag. One day, his master sent him to the crag to dig up slabs of peat and fetch them back for fuel. The man did as he was told, and he had just begun to slice the ground with his shovel and lift up the peat when all at once the smallest wee woman that he had ever seen in his life appeared before him. She was certainly a dainty little creature, perhaps no more than 2 feet tall. She was clad in a green gown and red stockings, and her long yellow hair tumbled down to her waist. The man was dumbfounded. He stuck his spade into the ground and gaped at her. She wagged her finger at him and said angrily, "What do you mortals think you're doing when you dig up our roof? How would you like it if I came along with a giant spade and took the lid off your house?" She stamped her wee foot and demanded, "You put that turf back at once, or you will rue the day that you ever lifted it." Now the poor man's teeth began to chatter with fright, for he had heard stories of how when a mortal offends the fairy folk, the fairies wreak havoc and a terrible revenge. He swiftly shoveled the peat back into its place, patted it down nicely, and returned to his master to tell him what had happened. The master only jeered at him. "A fairy, you say? Taking the roof off her house, were you? Drinking whiskey, more like it. Now go back at once and fetch me some peat, or there will be no wages for you this very week." The poor man had little choice but to do as he was told, for he had to feed his wife and his 2 wee bairns. Those were his children. So he spent the next few days working hard, digging up peat and fetching it back to the farm. During this time, no fairies appeared to him, not a single one. A year went by, and the man still had not caught sight of another fairy, and he began to think that his master might have been right. Perhaps he had only seen the fairy in a dream. Autumn went by, and then winter and spring, until once again it was summer. It was the very same day that he had lifted the peat the year before. The man had been working hard on the farm, and his master was pleased with him and gave him a present of some milk to take home to his family. He set off on his journey home with a spring in his step and was humming a happy tune. As it was such a nice evening, he went home the long way over the moor, by a path that led past Merlin's Crag. When he reached the crag, his legs felt strangely tired, and he sat down on the ground, and soon he fell into a deep sleep. It was near midnight when he was awoken by some strange but lively music. He rubbed his eyes, and what a shock he had when he saw that a band of fairies was dancing around him, glowering at him and pointing their wee fist in his face. He got up and tried to start on his way, but wherever he went, the fairies danced in a ring around him. Then out of the ring stepped the bonniest wee lady, and the other fairies laughed and called out, "Dance, man, dance." When the lady reached up, she took him by the hands. Although he had never been much of a dancer in his youth, he found himself waltzing and reeling as if he had been a dancer all his life. His head felt happy and light, and he forgot all about his home, his wife, and his wee bairns. The whole night long they danced on, until at last they heard the shrill sound of the farm and the cock meeting the morning with his loudest crowing. All at once the merriment ceased. The fairies stampeded headlong towards the crag, and they dragged the man along with them. A door opened up in the rocks, and in they all clattered. The door closed behind them, and they led the man down below the ground into a dimly lit hall. Here the fairies busied themselves with tasks. Some dipped quill pens in magic ink and copied out spells and fairy laws onto scrolls of parchment. Others were making fairy honey out of flowers, and still others were distilling fairy whiskey. The man could do nothing but sit down and watch and be amazed. Towards evening time, the wee woman in red stockings, whom he had first seen a year ago, came before him and led him back up to the door by which they had entered. She said, "The turf which you took from the roof of our house has reformed, and there is grass growing over it once again. Now you may go home, but you must swear never to tell any mortal of our secrets." The man swore never to tell the fairy secrets to a living soul, for he had seen some things which I have not been able to tell you about. And the door opened, and he went back out onto the moor. When he reached home, his wife stared at him in amazement. She seemed somehow to have aged. Then his children came into the hall of the house, but they were no longer wee infants, but lads and lasses, and they did not know him. "Where have you been for these long years?" demanded his wife. "How could you do such a thing as to run off and leave your wife and wee bairns to fend for themselves?" The man did not know what to say to this, but he soon learned that the one day he had spent underground had lasted 7 years, while the turf grew back over their roof. From that day on, he never again dug peat from that part of the moor, or even dared to venture near Merlin's Craig. This is the story of the giant and the baby. Quite an interesting story. This is from ancient Ireland. It was a fine, brisk spring morning in Ireland when Fionn MacMahon decided to take himself for a stroll along the white sandy beaches of the seashore, the better to breathe the air and enjoy the simple pleasures life had to offer. But that morning, life had more to offer, and it didn't look pleasant, for it was a giant bearing down on the beach, armed as if for war. So mighty was this giant that he strode across the sea with one long ship for his left foot and another for his right. Fionn, shaken out of his reverie, watched in awe as this mountainous personage drew closer, and being of no mood for a match, he ran off as fast as he could, thinking hard. It happened that Fionn had in his herds a mighty bull, a strange creature it was too, possessed of 3 horns and 2 tails. So he dragged it to a friend called Gall MacMorna, who was by far the largest and strongest of the Fianna, and bade him watch over the beast. Well, the earth began to tremble and shake, trees shivered on their roots, and the giant rose up from the distance. He told Gall that he'd come looking for the greatest warrior in all Ireland, and Fionn MacMahon was that man's name. He'd come to do battle, and if he could, take his life and his fame with it. Gall told him truthfully enough that Fionn and the Fianna weren't about, and that he'd been told to look after the cattle. Eyeing the bull, the giant said that he'd had a hunger on him from his long journey, and wouldn't mind at all roasting that beast over the fire for his breakfast. Gall, of course, told him he couldn't have the bull, and so each seized one of the bull's horns, heaving it to and fro until at last the bull was torn in 2. And so the giant looked in amazement, for if this was the boy that left to watch the cows, what were the men like? Fionn, meanwhile, had run back to his own house, where he told his wife to disguise him as a baby in a cradle, wrapped in thick blankets, and throw a rock on the fire. They made a hole beneath the cradle, and Fionn got in with only his head sticking out. The giant wasn't far behind him, and made his way into the house. Pretty good for a giant. Seating himself like the lord of his hall, he told Fionn's wife to shut the door, for there was a chilly draft blowing in. Fionn's wife said the door was stuck, and that Fionn found it easier just to slide the house around away from the wind. "Fair enough," said the giant, and he put his shoulder to the house, moving it about, much to Fionn's consternation. He was still hungry, half a bull not being enough for him, and he asked Fionn's wife for some of that bread she was cooking. She brought the rock to him, offering her apologies for the softness of it, for it had been cooking long. When the giant took a bite, he broke every tooth in his head, and he thought to himself, "What kind of people have I come across here?" Eventually the giant spotted the cradle and reached in to play with the baby, or so he thought. But Fionn took his hand in his mouth and bit 4 of his fingers clean off. That was it for the giant. He ran for the door and beat a hasty retreat, fearful should he ever meet more than Irish babies and farm boys. In merriment at his own cunning, Fionn raced after him, shouting imprecations and lifting a great lump of rock to fling after the giant, who was by then well out to sea. It landed square on top of him, and to this day is known as the Isle of Man, where the great hole left behind became Loch Neagh. All right, interesting story. I think we can assume it's probably not true, but it is one of those great tales that comes from out of ancient Ireland. Okay, we have one more story, and then we're going to go ahead and take a station break. This one, even though it's a Christmas story, it is very scary and very appropriate for Halloween, and it actually has Halloween-type mood to it as well. And this is the story of Krampus. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with him, but he would be the anti-Santa when he's actually kind of Santa's partner and will take care of the naughty children that Santa has basically pointed out. So I'm going to go ahead and play a little audio clip from Mythology and Fiction Explained on YouTube. It's a great explanation of just who Krampus is. So enjoy it, and then after that we'll take a station break and we'll be right back.
There is a man who spreads joy amongst children once a year. They lay awake in eager anticipation of his arrival. What presents does he bring with him on this evening? The cookies have been baked and the milk has been poured, but as the shadowy figure approaches, their excitement and joy turns into fear and despair. For this man is not Saint Nicholas, or Santa Claus, or even Father Christmas. This man is no man at all. This is Krampus, the shadow of Christmas, and tonight there will be no presents received. The half-goat, half-demon figure has often been described as the anti-Saint Nicholas. But in some countries, it is believed that Krampus accompanies Saint Nicholas during Christmas, punishing those children who have misbehaved, in contrast to Saint Nicholas, who rewards the well-behaved children. Krampus has been feared and celebrated in folklore for hundreds of years, and his appearance is that of nightmares. With large bearing horns, dark hair, sharp fangs, and a long pointed tongue. He carries around chains which are thought to be symbolic of the Christian church binding the devil. As well as these chains, Krampus carries a bundle of birch sticks used to swat misbehaving children. Saint Nicholas would reward the well-behaved children with gifts and presents, and he would leave the misbehaving children with a lump of coal. This would signal to Krampus which children were to be whipped and beaten. On occasion, Krampus would throw misbehaving children into his sack or basket and take them down to his lair in the underworld. The depictions and stories of Krampus do distinctly vary, and there is no definitive version considered to be correct. In some illustrations he is more monster than man, and in others he appears as half man, half demon. Unlike Saint Nicholas, the origins of Krampus appear to be a little bit more unclear. The earliest tales of Krampus do appear to have originated from the Austrian Alps in Germany, perhaps even predating Christianity. The word Krampus is derived from the German Krampen, meaning claw, and we do see Krampus share characteristics with other demonic creatures from other cultures, such as fauns and satyrs from Greek mythology. In Norse mythology, Krampus is believed to be the son of Hel, the daughter of Loki, and keeper of the underworld. The legend of Krampus is part of a century-old tradition in Germany. December 5th was known as Krampus Night, where children would be especially wary not to attract the attention of the beast, hoping that come December 6th, St. Nicholas would have left them presents. Children would leave out their shoes for St. Nicholas, who would fill them with gifts if they had been good. He would place a lump of coal in the shoes of those who have misbehaved, and they would be later dealt with by Krampus. Krampuslauf, or the Krampus Run, is an annual festival still celebrated to this day in Austria and throughout the Alpine region. The tradition itself is thought to be over 500 years old, and individuals would often dress up as the demon of Christmas himself. Wearing heavy coats of fur made from the hide of sheep and goats, they adorn horns and terrifying masks in the image of Krampus. They roam the towns and cities with torches and birch whips, and they are usually accompanied by a Saint Nicholas, who leads the group throughout the town, where they can be seen slapping people in the back of their legs with their whips and switches. They will scare the local children, and sometimes even adults, throwing them into the snow, all in the name of fun. Some will even go door to door, visiting people in their houses and giving them treats and other goodies, somewhat of a reversal to the trick-or-treat tradition. In some parts of Austria, before Christian influence, December was the month of monsters and ghouls.
Okay, we're going to take a short station break, and when we get back, we will be taking callers for our Chatting with the Elven Scholar. This is Elven Awakenings, chatting with the Elven Scholar on Heroes and Mortals Radio. We'll be right back. When you go to college, you expect the high halls and libraries filled with old books. But much has changed, and in today's world, online schools have exploded in popularity. Please join us at Llambén Gomor, the world's first online college with a nod towards Elven and humankind alike. With Llambén Gomor, you can start a new career or a new life in the holistic health field, learn a new Elven language, study history and culture, or the environment. We believe everyone deserves an affordable education with personalized attention. We provide full certifications in the following fields: home herbalist, Reiki levels 1 through master, nutritionist, first aid, Elven history and culture, Elven languages with Quenya and Sindarian, anatomy, botany, introduction to archaeology, ecology, astronomy, Elven laws of manifestation and meditation, and we also offer full diplomas in the fields of medical herbalist and medical nutritionist. More classes are being added. Many students have found new careers in the above fields. These classes are sponsored and designed by Tree of Life Holistic Wellness Center, which was the largest naturopathic medical center in the state of California. You can pay for your classes outright or join a low-cost monthly subscription, which allows you to take as many classes as you like at one time while you maintain the subscription. This college was founded to give you a chance to expand your horizons while believing in who you are. All classes are certified and are aimed at helping you start a new life and a new career. Adult study programs for both elves and humankind alike, designed specifically for you. You can find us at www.elvenscholar.org. Discover what is inside of you. Be who you are at Llambén Gomor, the Elven School of Lore Masters. All right, we're back. So this is the second half of the show where we like to go ahead and talk about, address different questions and comments from our listeners. So I'm going to go ahead and activate our telephone. So if you decide to call in, this is a U.S. number, so be aware of that. If you're calling outside of the U.S. or Canada, there could be an extra charge onto there. The number is 442-227-2187. So 442-227-2187. You are always welcome, though, to call outside of the show during the week. Leave a voicemail if you want to leave a question or answer, and I'll be happy to address that during the show. You can also email us at radio@elvenscholar.org. That's radio@elvenscholar.org, and you can actually leave your question or comment. And again, I'd be happy to address that. I'll be looking at that during the show just in case you send it during the time. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed a few of our stories that we had there. We're going to go ahead, and I've got a question that's already come in, so I'd like to go ahead and address that. But before I do, I wanted to take a little bit of levity here and explain the difference between, and I don't know how many of you know that, and I actually was not totally sure. I think my wife knew about it more than I did, and that is the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard. I imagine probably a lot of you know this, but I will admit to ignorance on this, that I did not know what it was. So we're going to talk about that here in just a second, but I just wanted to give a quick reminder that next week's show is about the Elven concept of time, living in the here and now. A really great show, one of those that's very close to my heart, about how people are not living in the here and now, and they have this interesting concept of time being something for real, which it's not. So next week's episode is the Elven concept of time, living in the here and now. But let's go ahead and have a little bit of fun here with what is the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. All right, and then I'm going to address a question. All right, during Halloween season, it's not uncommon to see your neighbor's front yards adorned with fake tombstones and ghosts. Well, some might refer to this as, a graveyard decor. Others go with cemetery. Indeed, people tend to use the words graveyard and cemetery interchangeably, but there is actually a difference between these two. So let's go ahead. For starters, what is a graveyard? To understand the difference between a graveyard and cemetery, let's start by looking at the definition of each word. A graveyard is an area of land, often next to a church, all right, where people are buried. And this all started back in the Middle Ages, where wealthy or otherwise influential Christians were generally interred inside of a church after they died. often in a crypt or tomb beneath the floor. So if you were wealthy or well-to-do, you got to be encased in stone somewhere away from all the worms. All right, the less wealthy congregants were buried outside in the churchyard, and that section became known as the graveyard. This practice continued for many centuries. So the compound word graveyard stems from the Proto-Germanic graben, which means to dig, and garden, who of course refers to an enclosed area of land. Okay, so what is a cemetery? Well, just like a graveyard, a cemetery is also defined as a place where the dead are buried, but it's a relatively newer concept. By the early 19th century, so early 1800s, all right, the population growth was quite rapid. People were increasing quite a bit in population. Church graveyards became filled up, there was no room inside the churches, and there was a need for new burial grounds. Thus, independent sites called cemeteries became more common as designated final resting places. So cemeteries are typically not affiliated with a specific church, so you don't have to be a congregant to be buried there. They're also often located away from a town or city center to allow for more space. All right, so one last thing, the etymology of the word, or the word history of cemetery, stems from the Greek koimeterion, which means dormitory or resting place. And early Christians came to use the term to refer to a person's final resting rather than the literal sleep context. All right, so as you can see, oh, I've got a call, so let's go ahead and take that real quick, and then we will finish with the graveyard. Okay.
Call from
Okay, Nesidel, you're on the line. What can I help you with? Good to hear from you, too.
Oh, since it's Halloween time, what would you consider a banshee?
Ah, a banshee. That's a great question. I actually do know the definition for this. Okay, so I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and address this. I'll keep you on there for a few more minutes, so if that's okay with you.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, a banshee. All right, the word actually comes from, it's more or less an ancient Irish term for a fey woman or an elf, a fairy woman. All right, and the banshee, as it's defined now, she's the woman that would cry and moan at the imminent death of someone nearby. Someone was getting ready to die. So that's how a lot of people look at it now. And so a lot of people look at banshee as something absolutely horrendous. And if you heard her moaning and crying, which, a lot of people, when they pass, sometimes it was on a stormy night. And so they would hear this moaning and groaning, which is, of course, the wind and the storms. And they'd go, someone in the household's going to die tonight. And it's really interesting how self-fulfilling prophecy, as I mentioned before, fear can be. But most mortals, you would say, humans look at that as a very, very bad thing, that, somebody's getting ready to die. It's kind of interesting how there's an old fairy myth about how fairies will cry at weddings and laugh at funerals. And people go, that's a sure way to know that you're near a fairy, is because they cry at weddings and laugh at funerals. And yeah, I've come to know why, to a certain degree, they do that. And it's actually quite insightful. As a fairy, let's say, or an elf, one can tend to be more in tune not only with one's feelings, but be very empathetic, to be able to understand the feelings of others. All right, so why would you cry at a wedding? Because unfortunately, if we look at weddings today in the United States, half of them at least are going to fail. And most of the time, and of course weddings now are, I get married today and in a week from now I get divorced. I'm bored and move on. That's how a lot of it is. So I can see a fairy crying at a wedding because it was not true love. These people are standing up in front and they're declaring their love when they really don't love each other. And of course, that's a very sad thing, that people are promising the gift of their heart when they really don't mean it. And laughing at funerals, okay, that seems like a very strange one, until you realize that if you truly know where you're going after you've left this mortal chain, after you've left this mortal body, a lot of people would understand that it's just a time of rest. And we can talk about this in another show. I'd be more than happy to do that. But it's a time of rest, a time of thinking, a time to reflect on your life about what you did, and then maybe come back and try again and again. And what a joyful thing it is to know that you don't have only 70 years or so on this world, and if you don't get it right, that's it for all of eternity. In my view, that's not the way it is. And so I guess in some ways you can look at it as joyful, going, all right, this person's had a rough time, and now they're going to get to rest and reflect, and then they get to come back and try again and again and again as they need to. So the Banshee throughout history has looked at, oh, this is a horrible woman who's coming, and she's getting ready to announce the death as if she was the one causing it, but all she's doing is announcing it. So again, Banshee, it simply means woman of the she meaning fairy people. Is that good?
Yeah, she's not really bad.
No, she's not bad at all. She's actually saying, hey, something's about to happen here, and I'm letting you all know this is a great time for closure, if that's what you'd like to use your time for. Does that help, Nasadio?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the question. You have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you.
Namare.
Namarie. Okay, that was a great question, Nasadio. Thank you. She's a wonderful elven sister. Okay, well, I think I was just about done talking about the cemeteries. So I'm going to get to another question here real quick, because I know we're getting close to running out of time. This is a question from another dear elven sister, Eruana, out of Estonia. And for anybody that doesn't know too much about the Elvish language, that means God's gift, or gift from God is her name. And she certainly is that. All right, she asked the question, she said, how to meditate and calm the mind when dark thoughts are disturbing you, or disturbing the mind. You can't concentrate because you have a lot of dark thoughts. Well, if you'll remember last week, Sean from Canada asked a similar question. His was, how can you just quiet the mind, so you don't have all these other thoughts? Adriana went a little bit, took a different angle with that and went, what if the thoughts are dark? What if you can't stop the dark thoughts? Okay, which unfortunately in this world of fear is quite extensive. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover that real quickly for you, Adriana, and anybody else who's interested, because those who are practicing meditation, absolutely, it takes a lot of practice. You've got all these thoughts going on, and it gets really difficult when those thoughts are dark, which of course translates into fearful thoughts, whether we admit it or not. Okay, I can give the most common sense answer first is, let's try to surround ourselves with joy. Make sure that we play music that brings us peace, that we maybe stop watching the news, that we start involving ourselves in joyous activities and things that bring us joy. Things of that nature. Light some candles, take a nice hot bath. There's so many things. Get involved in a hobby that brings you joy and peace. Start surrounding yourself with joy. And for some, that can push the dark thoughts aside. But obviously, that is a very simplistic answer. And while it can work, it by far doesn't work for everyone. So what can we do about that? And so I'm going to refer back to a method of healing. Dr. John Christopher, he was perhaps the most famous herbalist and naturopathic doctor of the 20th century. And often people would go, you got any great painkillers? Because unfortunately, most of the really great painkillers have been made illegal, and so you can't use them, in holistic medicine. So he had a great answer. He said, the best painkiller is curing whatever ill it is that's causing the pain. So let's cure the problem, the pain will go away. I know that, again, sounds pretty simplistic, but as a doctor for over 20 years, I have seen that is true. Okay, but how does that apply to dark thoughts? All right? Okay, well, it's one thing to try to push the thoughts out by, trying to surround yourself more joyously, which is a wonderful thing to do. But how about let's get to the root cause? What's bringing that darkness into your life? What's causing the dark thoughts? Okay, it's one thing for me to go, well, I'm going to try to make myself happy by surrounding myself with joy. Well, at the same time, I know that I don't have money to pay for bills, and my partner is leaving me, and I'm being abused because of whatever my situation is. And just by walking around being happy, it doesn't seem like that's going to make that go away. So I understand that, and I understand how some answers can seem simplistic. All right. We have to remember that because it's a dark thought, it is based on fear. And I've said it ad nauseum. Every day we have a choice between love, making a decision in our life based on love or fear. All right. So how does that fit in here? Because when we're in situations, and a lot of people may not like this, but I have seen this. I've counseled other patients on this before, and I find it to generally be true. When we find ourselves in a situation that seems to be out of our control, that no matter what we do, we can't seem to get out of it. We can't seem to stop the situation. Okay, Corona's here, and so I can't work because they said my job's not essential, or whatever the case may be. And okay, well, how am I going to fix that? Okay, well, I'm going to talk from a pretty high spiritual point here. And again, some of you might not like this, but I have found it to be true, and sometimes it takes a lot to admit this in your own life. I had someone ask me about a year or so ago, they said, why is it that if I thought I was done with my karma, okay, I just said I'm good, I'm cool, I don't need my karma anymore, I've gone beyond it. So why do I keep having this happen to me over and over and over again? And I found that the answer to that is very simple, kind of what I alluded to last week about letting go. You're not ready. And I know people will go, well, I have no control over that. That's very cruel to say that people are picking on me and this is happening and it's not my fault. And how do I have anything to do with that? And I know on a very basic physical level that seems so true because I have been there. I have been in that situation more than you know, and maybe I'll talk about myself more in the future. But I have learned about humans that you will remain in a situation until you've learned what it is that you need to know from that situation. And they go, okay, what is it? What am I learning from being picked on every day? What am I learning from my job being taken away? What am I learning from that? Well, that's individual. I can't answer that question because it's different for everyone. All right? As I always say, it seems, everyone has their own path to walk and at their own pace. And I can't answer why you're going through this. For some people, it would be, well, maybe the universe, for example, my job, okay, this is not working out. I keep being told I'm non-essential and I'm not getting paid, and how is that my fault? Okay, well, again, I'm not judging and I don't know the answer to yours, but sometimes it can be as simple, whether we like it or not, as I'm going to change my job. I'm going to change my career. I'm going to go back to school again. And I got to say, you know, a lot in this world now has a lot of courses, a lot of education that you can do at low cost or for free, but you have to be willing to make the steps. You have to do it yourself. All right, so maybe it's because you're being told by the universe, okay, or by your higher self, however you want to look at it, it's time for me to make some changes. All right, this is not working for me. I'm going to go do this. You know, it's the old cliche. You are not a tree. You're not rooted here. You can move, whether it be physically or spiritually. You can make the changes in your life. All right, maybe you're going through something because you've not learned the lesson, because maybe it was some old past karma, and maybe you've got to learn to forgive. Maybe you have to learn to love unconditionally. Maybe you have to learn to live without anger. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But if you're living in dark thoughts, you have some kind of fear going on in your life. And while it is important and good to surround yourself with happy thoughts and beautiful music and artwork and walks in the forest, which I've said before is a wonderful healing thing to do. They found it's great for anxiety and depression and other psychological issues. It's great to do that. All right. But in the end, why are you having those dark thoughts? That needs to be addressed. Are you missing somebody terribly? Totally get that. Absolutely get it. You would love to be with someone, but because of the things that are going on in the world today, you can't leave. You can't leave Estonia, or you can't leave Canada, or you can't leave England, and your family or your loved one is somewhere else. And so you have dark thoughts, and you're going, it's not my fault. I get it. And so what you do is you find a way to find peace, going, okay, maybe the lesson this time is one of the hardest lessons in life. Believe me, I'm speaking from experience. And that's the lesson of patience. That it will in time work out, but can we be patient? Can I show that I can be patient enough that I can get through this lesson and I don't have to keep repeating this over and over again? That maybe one of the things you can do is to go, all right, I don't like the situation, but I'm going to make the best of it. Instead of being sad and angry or whatever, I'm going to go, okay, look, I'm still not 6 feet under. I'm still breathing. I still have the sun shining on me, and I have people around me who hopefully they care about you. All right, so you can look at that. My wife and I, many years ago, before we moved up and built our Elven Sanctuary in Northern California, we had moved to Las Vegas, Nevada for a short while because that's where our partners, when we were doing some work with them, wanted to go. So we went. And we act, nothing against it. Las Vegas, everyone has their own path. And for some, it's the tool they need. And for about 11 months, it was the tool that Peggy and I needed until we finally didn't need it anymore. But while we were there, we were not fans of Las Vegas. We did not care for the fast scene. We didn't care for the gambling. We didn't care for the amount of aggressiveness and anger that seemed to be in a lot of the population. And again, there are lots of wonderful people in Las Vegas, but overall, it's a very type A place. And for that, Peggy and I are not type A type people. But what did we do? We said, all right, we're going to be here for about a year. And it was 11 months before we left and came to California. And we said, all right, let's make the best of the situation and let's learn what we can. And we did. We had such a good time. We went hiking up on Mount Charleston. We hiked through Red Rock. We experienced so many different adventures and had a really good time outside of the gambling, outside of the city. There's where Las Vegas is at is a beautiful place, actually. And you can find joy wherever you're at. And sometimes that's what the answer to the lesson is that I will find joy in every day, no matter what my circumstances may be. My wife loves to look at these Facebook pages of these people who it's hard to look at sometimes. They've lost their arms, they've lost their legs, they were either born that way or they lost them later because of an infection or an accident. And yet the posts show such joy and peace on these people's faces. If they can find joy and peace in a situation that most people would want to give up in, surely we can get past some of the dark thoughts and accept that there's something that we need to learn now, that we need to go through. All right, didn't mean to get into a big preachy thing there, but sometimes the best way to get through dark thoughts while trying to meditate is to figure out why I'm having dark thoughts, address the issue, and let it go. Maybe learn whatever it's trying to teach me. I hope that helps you, Ariana. That was a wonderful question. Thank you for contributing it. Okay, so I think that about ties it up for today. Remember, again, next week's episode is about the Elven concept of time, living in the here and now. Big favorite subject of mine. All right, so I'm going to take some time out. We're going to go to the next section of the show, which I absolutely adore, and that's story time. As with each episode, I like to take a moment out and pass on a parable, a story that has some kind of meaning. I've discussed this before. Parables were and still are a wonderful method amongst a lot of the villages and small towns around the world of passing on some of life's lessons to future generations so that they're not forgotten, and they're told in the mode of a short story, often fictional, but really often based on something that happened in one of our ancestors' lives a very long time ago. Well, some of you may know this story. It's relatively popular, and it's The Eagle and the Chicken, a wonderful tale about not forgetting who you are and not allowing others to dictate who that is. It's a wonderful tale. I hope you like it. I've done a little bit differently than what's done with a lot of the telling of this tale. I'm going to give it to you with two endings, both a positive and a negative ending, and as always, the ending of how your tale ends is up to you. So I hope you enjoy it.
One day a farmer got bored, and he decided to go ahead and take the day off and go amongst the mountains that surrounded his farm to have a little adventure. On his hike, he came across a very large eagle's nest. Now, he'd seen them many times before, but this one in particular caught his attention because within it was one small white egg. The egg was still warm, and he looked around and could not see any of the other siblings, nor the mother or the father eagle, so he decided out of compassion and partly out of curiosity, he took the egg gently and carried it back to his farm to see if he could help it hatch. He placed it underneath his prized hen and waited. The weeks went by, and lo and behold, the eggs began to hatch, and amongst all the little chicks was one little eaglet. The first thing that eaglet saw was the face of the mother hen, and from that point on, he believed he was a chicken. He grew amongst the other siblings there and learned to act like a chicken. He clucked and he pecked at the ground and ate the chicken feed and ate the little bugs. And for all intents and purposes, he was a chicken. For most of his life, he lived this way and believed that he was a chicken indeed. He never looked up. They always looked down at the ground. But one day, a large shadow passed overhead, and himself, as well as the other chickens in the yard, looked up and saw this great bird flying overhead. He looked at the other chickens and said, "What is that?" And the other ones replied, "That is an eagle. They are the kings and queens of the air, while we are simply those of the ground." He said, "I would sure like to fly like that." And they laughed at him and they said, "No, you are a chicken, and that is all you will ever be, and the ground is your domain." Well, that lit a fire within his heart, and he knew that there was something more to life than being just a chicken. So he said, "I think I can fly." And of course, the other chickens in the yard rolled on the ground and laughed at him and said, "There is nothing more for you in this life but to be a chicken. It is your destiny, and that is all you have to do." Well, he couldn't believe them. So he slowly worked his way up and hopped until he got on top of a fence and jumped and fluttered and fell to the ground amongst all of their laughter. But he still did not believe that that was all there was to his life. So as the days passed, he practiced and practiced, and sure enough, one day he was able to fly from the fence onto the farmer's roof. And from there on, he took off and headed into the skies and remembered that he was an eagle. Ending number 2. He spent his life as a chicken, never knowing what his true potential was. Every so often, another eagle or great bird would fly overhead, and he would peer above with tired old eyes, wishing within himself that he could take the chance and see if he could fly. But he never did. This is a story with two endings, very much like your life. You have the choice to live your life as a chicken, to live it as others have dictated for you to do so. Or you can remember who you are and take off and fly and become that eagle that is within all of us. There's a saying that goes that your destiny is the path that you choose, and fate is what you get when you do not choose, when you let others do it for you. You are within yourself the shining elven child of light. You can either remain in the darkness and live the life that others tell you to live, or you can remember who you are. You are that eagle You are that elven light. Take off and soar. It is your choice. Namaste.
It's time for final thoughts of the day, and this one was inspired by a Facebook group my wife tried to post about our latest Elven radio show last week. It's about our posting it on our YouTube channel. They are a Lord of the Rings type group, but they focus mostly on the darker side of the story, and they actually rejected our post as it was not dark or negative in nature. No problem, different paths. And such, everyone has their own path to walk and at their own pace. And I understand. We need both sides of the coin of life, the light and the dark, the day and the night. The day with the sun gives us light and warmth, growth, birth, rebirth, the ability to see far and wide and to be more extrospective, examining the world outside of yourself, not being so self-contained, but looking around you and being able to see something outside of your own self. The night and the moon, on the other hand, gives us time for peace, repose, quiet, solitude, rest and healing, and a moment to be introspective, to take the time to examine ourselves from within. We need both these sides, the light and the dark, for how can we truly appreciate the one without the other? I have an elven saying I sometimes use. How can I explain the color green to a man who has always been blind? The problem arises when we dwell in one state or the other, never allowing ourselves to experience both to the fullness. For each side has something that it can teach us, not only as elves or fae or otherkin, but as children of this world. One of my favorite authors, maybe some of you know him, Khalil Gibran, a very famous Lebanese author, poet from the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was actually born in 1883, and he passed away in 1931. Well, he wrote a beautiful short prose on the subject of joy and sorrow. Which one was the best, in other words? The book that this is in is a very short book called The Prophet. Absolutely love it. It's a fiction, kind of a mixture of prose and poetry, more prose, about a fictional character who was away from his home for many, many years, and his ship had finally come in, and he was getting ready to go onto the ship and sail away. But he'd been in this village waiting for the ship to return for 12 years, and he had grown to love the people there, and they had grown to love him. He was something of a mentor, a teacher, a master to them, and it broke his heart to leave them. And as he was walking down to the pier to the ship, the villagers came running out, begging him to speak to them at least one last time. And so the very short book is a series of questions that the people asked him, and to ask for his response, to hear something of his wisdom. Well, and he was asked on joy and sorrow, okay, the light and the dark, so to speak, two sides of the coin. And here's what he wrote. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is it not the cup that holds your wine, the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hallowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that has given you joy. And when you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. Verily, you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and your joy. Only when you are empty are you at a standstill and balanced? When the treasure keeper lifts you to weigh his gold and his silver, needs must your joy or silver rise or fall. I'd like to go ahead and get ready to close out here for the day, and I'd like to play a sweet little old Buddhist story about this subject, one encompassing how our perspective can rule our days or nights, and how we can change it all by simply looking at life from a different angle, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and play this little short story, and then I will be right back.
Hi, this is Dare to Do Motivation, and this is a story about perspective. So once upon a time, there was an old lady who cried all the time. Her elder daughter was married to an umbrella merchant, while the younger daughter was the wife of a noodle vendor. On sunny days, she worried. Oh no, the weather is so nice and sunny. No one is going to buy any umbrellas. What will happen if the shop has to be closed? These worries made her sad. She just could not help but cry. When it rained, she would cry for the younger daughter. She thought, oh no, my younger daughter is married to a noodle vendor. You cannot dry noodles without the sun. Now there will be no noodles to sell. What should we do? As a result, the old lady lived in sorrow every day. Whether sunny or rainy, she grieved for one of her daughters. Her neighbors couldn't console her and jokingly called her the crying lady. One day she met a monk. He was very curious as to why she was always crying. She explained the problem to him. The monk smiled kindly and said, "Madam, you need not worry. I will show you a way to happiness, and you will need to grieve no more." The crying lady was very excited. She immediately asked the monk to show her what to do. And the monk replied, "It is very simple. You just need to change your perspective. On sunny days, do not think of your elder daughter not being able to sell umbrellas, but the younger daughter being able to dry her noodles. With such good, strong sunlight, she must be able to make plenty of noodles, and her business must be very good. When it rains, think about the umbrella store of the elder daughter. With the rain, everyone must be buying umbrellas. She will sell a lot of umbrellas, and her store will prosper." Finally, the old lady saw the light. She followed the monk's instruction. After a while, she didn't cry anymore. Instead, she was smiling every day. From that day on, she was known as the Smiling Lady. You see, in life, in your life, everything is about perspective. There are always two sides to a coin. It depends on you what side you choose to look at. For the old lady, actually nothing changed in her life. It still rained some days, and it still was sunny some days. So it didn't really make a difference to her daughter's businesses. But the thing that changed was she. She changed her perspective. And that is the secret to a happy life.
The story you just heard was donated to us by Dare to Do Motivation, a wonderful YouTube channel that hosts a large number of short but simple Buddhist stories of encouragement. So I hope that you will give them a listen and a like and subscribe. They've been wonderful to us now for about a year. All right. Well, that's it for today. I have enjoyed speaking with all of you and being a part of your lives and teaching you while you are teaching me as well. Thank you for listening, my friends, and until we are together again next week, may you be blessed by the elves. My name is Dr. Erendil Spindalelis, and I am the Elven Scholar. Namaste. Megovana, my Elven brothers and sisters. My name is the Elven Scholar. Come and join me on our YouTube channel, The Gentle Musings of an Elven Scholar, where we will explore all things mythic. We will delve into topics such as elven healing and diet, language, culture, spiritual depths, and practical how-to videos on living as an elf in today's world. Let's find that balance within our own true inner light. Thank you, my friends, for watching, and I hope you will take this journey with me.